I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like always, ask any questions. You can throw things in chat as well. Um, and I decided to, Julie sent some questions in about the performance breathing one. So I'm going to address each one of those first, right off the bat. And then I've got some other slides to go through to, kind of talk about what you did in performance breathing one and the modules and some points on each thing, whether it be breathing mechanics or breathing control, et cetera. Um, and if those draw out more questions, awesome. If it's just a good refresher, also good. And then at the end, talk a little bit about what to expect with performance breathing two, um, the next, I guess not really a module, it's really the next mini course, right? But I'm going to go ahead and get started. And like I said, if you have any questions, just go ahead and yell out because when I go to the slideshow, I can't see all this stuff anymore. So, well, I can see you guys. Okay, I still got you. Awesome. All right. I'm assuming everybody can see that. If you can't, yell at me. Like I said, I just kind of went over this, go through some questions. We'll go through the course and hit any questions you have that pop up while we have them. So your first question, Julie, was what kind of changes should be expected in the reassessments? And do you see people leap in progress or just make general and gradual kind of progressions? For the breathing assessments, those kind of objective numbers, vital lung capacity using a tape measure, at high low, and then especially breath hold on inhale and breath hold on exhale, what we call the controlled pause. They are usually pretty gradual. You can see bigger changes, but with those objective numbers, you usually see a more gradual progression on that. For the neuro assessments, where we were kind of we gave you the various range of motion tests you could do after doing each of the breathing exercises, right? And that's just given us really, sometimes I call that a global response of your nervous system. Did your nervous system like or feel safe about that breathing exercise you just did, or did it not? Or does it feel kind of neutral? In which case you would see kind of the same range of motion test on a toe touch or a torso rotation. Sometimes you can see very large improvements in that and very quickly. It's very individual dependent, but if it is something, I'll put it to clients this way: if it's something your brain is craving, your subconscious brain, your unconscious brain, you don't even know it, it can make a huge impact. And breathing can be one of those things that starts to really open up a person's range of motion, which is not what we think about when we think about breathing for sure. Especially if they've had an injury or surgery history that is very torso related, broken ribs, um, spinal issues. I had a gal who's had a tremendous amount of abdominal surgeries and things like that, and so that breathing it became very restricted. And when we started doing some breathing work, it changed. It changed not only her range of motion, but it changed how much stability she had, like doing squatting and lunging kind of activities, as well as how grounded she felt. So you're getting very visceral in a sense when you start doing breathing things. So does that kind of answer the question for you?
Yeah, Pat, that does, and it's super insightful. And it's interesting you see the visceral thing because when I was doing the diaphragmatic breathing, I almost got a little nauseous in part of it. I was like, wow, is this normal? But I definitely could feel just more of a visceral effect when I did some of those initially.
Yeah, and we'll get to that question here in a second that you had. All right. So what's a reasonable rhythm for reassessment of the basically all the breathing, the objective breathing assessments? Um, and during at the end where you've got the programming module where we talk about the 14-day breathing habit builder, we like people to get a baseline, obviously, at the very beginning that you've got on that day one, repeat on day 7 and 14, so that you can start to see, even if it's small changes in the objective numbers of your breathing, you're seeing that change. Now, as time goes on, um, and after that 14-day breathing habit builder, every 2 to 3 weeks is usually good in the beginning. And I don't check mine every 2 or 3 weeks now, but and it's not as necessary. And it would also depend if you had, if you've got a group of athletes too, then it gives them some hard numbers like, wow, I could do that breath hold for much longer. And like we talked about in the course, that breath hold, not like we're trying to make everybody a free diver, right? But that breath hold is interesting, especially the controlled pause where you exhale and then hold your breath, right? That's a hugely different thing. But that sense of air hunger, right? When you start to realize, when you first do those, I'm sure it felt like, oh my gosh, I'm struggling to hold my breath, right? But as you start to train your breathing, it becomes less of a big deal. You just don't become so threatened by that sense of air hunger. And that can play out both on an athlete's anxiety side, in a good way, right? That they can control things a little bit better, but then also on a performance side, when you're out of breath after you sprinted down the soccer field, right? Or at the lacrosse field, which I'm about to go about a half hour after this thing and watch my daughter play some lacrosse, right? But so this is, generally what we do as far as, 3 times in that 14-day breathing habit builder really gives you a solid understanding of where you're at. And then every 2 to 3 weeks is continuing with the training. Now, as we get into PB2 and PB3, you're going to get new programming, right? And so, not everybody has taken this in the way you guys are with this bundle of PB1, 2, 3, although I believe it is the best way to do it, right? Because you're building on these new skills and you're getting these different programs, but each one will have a new program for you to be able to utilize with the training and the assessments.
Pat, quick question on
Yeah.
that. Going back to the athletes, when you do this with teams or working with athletes, you generally measure them yourself, or do you allow them to measure? Because I can imagine there might be some human error in the assessment process. Do you have a recommendation or suggestion on that front?
There definitely can be with that on the vital lung capacity primarily, right? Putting the tape in the right spot and stuff like that. So if I'm working with a team, I'm going to pair them up, right? Ideally in buddy teams, and they will always keep that buddy, right? So there's always the same person doing that test, right? Individually, then I'm
Yep.
usually doing it on them so that uh, it stays the same.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Do you find that once someone reaches the high scores, easy to stay, or do you have to continually do them intentionally? It's a great question. I have found that it's generally pretty easy to stay there, um, especially for the VLC and for the high-low, for those specific tests. Because once you become good at diaphragmatic breathing and being able to actually expand the rib cage, excuse me, and it becomes the habitual way you start to breathe, I find that fairly easy to actually maintain that. The breath holds, it could be a little bit different though, just because that's not something we normally do. Like, well, hey, it's Tuesday. It's the day I hold my breath again, unless you're a free diver, right? So you can see a little bit more variability in that. But what I find is it comes back quickly if you want to train that, right? I'm actually doing that right now. I'm putting myself through what's called a hypercapnia training. Hyper meaning more, right, as opposed to hypo. So hypercapnia meaning CO2. So I'm doing training, doing CO2 tables, which is kind of what freedivers do, because I'm interested in how that's going to affect me in some different ways, where you're increasing CO2 in the system and you're actually doing breath holds. And so it's been kind of interesting. I'm doing it for several different reasons, but it's been interesting to see how that improves very quickly, like week to week, improving 10, 20 seconds on breath holds. Um, but when you start to integrate the breathing habits into just your daily life and the exercise, which is we really get that into PB3. Like how do you breathe during exercise, both aerobic and anaerobic? And we get into that. And so when you start to integrate that, then it really becomes more habitual and you stay at those higher scores, if you will, for all the testing.
And that habitual side has been an important piece, whether you're the athlete or the individual training yourself, or whether you're the coach of the team, to be able to bring in this habit concept was something that was really important for us. Is, how do you get a room full of 60 athletes to get on board and to start building these habits? So that habit side, for the intentionality of the coach to bring this into the habit, do you give it 5 minutes every day at practice? Do you give it 15 minutes twice a week? Planning it into your schedule is also an important part to help your athletes gain those habits, as we kind of outline in the 14-day tracker. So hopefully that helps too.
Yeah, definitely helps. And I found myself even just in this long drive, in the car. So like habit stacking, you're already doing something, and then it just, if you get into a stressful, traffic jam or something like that, I would go to the breathing, and it was just super handy to have. So just
Yeah,
cueing that natural cue, that can happen, throughout the pockets of your day too.
Sure.
definitely. Definitely.
And that can go both ways too. It can be the relaxation in traffic. For me, I'm 2 miles off the I-25, the craziest highway, in the West. And if I'm on my motorcycle, I'll use the opposite. I'll try to ramp up my breathing and my awareness and my level of just kind of stimulation. Pat's given me that tool. So, okay, I do a little bit of burst breathing before I jump on interstate so that I'm more aware, I'm more alert, and thus feel, more safe in those stressful situations too.
So your last question, Julie, was about struggling with the diaphragmatic breathing, just kind of doing that 360 breathing, right? This is this is really interesting and cool. This is a great example of some things. So first, I'll just talk about some. You said, are there any tips for that? The two variations that we show are kind of if you lie supine on your back, um, it can be easier to diaphragmatically breathe in that position, and that can help people and give them a more positive neuro assessment after doing it, or worrying less about 360 breathing and just kind of put your hands in that high-low test position and breathe into the low hand. We dislike the term belly breathing, which people use. We understand why people use it. People just tend to push or pooch their belly out then when they're doing it instead of breathing in a kind of an expansive 360 manner. But again, sometimes it can help people. Um, the progressions then also that we show. So the Superman pose where you're kind of putting your hands between your ribs and your hips, right in here, and just trying to breathe into the hands. It's more of a lateral breath that's happening, or using a small resistance band, kind of crank down over your ribs is another way. I mentioned this because even though they are what we would consider as progressions, because they are to some degree resisted breathing, right? This is something I often see with all the brain-based training I do, whether it's joint mobility exercises or vision and vestibular stuff or breathing. If someone is an athlete, or someone is a big exerciser and things like that, sometimes they need the harder way to do it to get a positive response. Doing it the easy way is actually threatening. We had a guy in the clinic and who was super fit. He was a CrossFit coach. He ended up going to the Buds training, Navy SEAL stuff. Blew his knee out. We fixed his knee. He went back to it. He blew it out again. Long story, but he's now a paramedic in South Denver. This guy's a stud, right? He only had fifth gear though. He did not have first through fourth gear. Everything we did with him had to be at the hardest level for him to get a positive response. And he had to then train down instead of doing things really fast or really hard, and then be able to tweak it down a notch and tweak it down a notch so that he owned all five gears, not just fifth gear. Right. And so that's another thing you can see. So sometimes the progressions can be helpful to people
Yeah,
with that.
that's really insightful because I'm sure I'll have athletes that are just like him to some degree. Personally,
Yeah.
I found it, and I don't know if this is normal, but I found there was this, excuse me, sense of coordination needed for that particular exercise where my mind almost wanted to belly breathe. And I'm like, no, you like move it up higher. It took me about 7 days to almost coordinate the movement that was supposed to happen, which I found really interesting. And then it integrated like 7 days. I'm like, oh, it's not so difficult now, but it was definitely difficult at the beginning. It was hard to coordinate the muscle, I guess, and the joint mobility at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be interesting, and there can be any number of reasons for that, right? In people's histories and things like that that can drive that. And and sometimes it's even if people are not diaphragmatic breathers, and then they try this and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. And it happens right away. And then sometimes it just feels really uncoordinated and it takes some time. It's kind of interesting. You talked about it at 7 days, all of a sudden it was like, okay,
Like,
now I've got it, right? And and that's really the reason for the 14-day breathing habit builder, right? Is so that you're getting that consistent a work in, and that's how that's how the brain works. If anybody's ever studied when you get deep into like kinesiology and things like that, you start taking classes on like motor control and motor planning and all these things that happen in the brain for people to move well, right? And what you see is that there's really three phases of motor learning. And that first phase is the cognitive phase, where this would be learning a new skill. Like you've never played baseball and now you have to go bat and someone's trying to teach you, right? And they're talking about your foot position and they're talking about the hips moving first and the arm lag and all these different things. And you are cognitively trying to do all that. That's about the first 1,000 reps, right? And then the second level is the associative phase. So after about 1,000 reps, then your brain starts putting two things together or three things together, right? So it starts associating to build the entire movement pattern. And then somewhere around 10,000 reps, we've all kind of heard that, it varies, but several thousand more, right, is when the autonomic phase happens, when everything happens at the same time, right? My best analogy for this is when I remember learning to being taught how to drive a stick shift. right? It was very cognitive. Okay, I've got to push my left foot down. I've got to let my right foot up. I've got to shift it into, right? You're thinking about all these things. And then all of a sudden you can, oh, I can do the shifting in my foot at the same time, right? And now I can drive and eat and text and listen to a podcast all at the same time, right? So everything becomes very, together, but it takes repetition. But that's the only way, right? No one walks up on the golf course the first time and hitting like Tiger Woods, right? Or anything, piano, etc. So that repetition becomes super, super important. There are a couple other options, that you can think about if people encounter this is because we tend to take very deep breaths when we're first figuring out that diaphragm breathing and breathing low is maybe just try and breathe a little bit, maybe just try and expand 360 a little bit, right? And just make it very small and then, or make it a long, but not like, very forceful inhale, just a longer inhale that's very easy. There's a couple other ways I've found that can help people tie into that diaphragm a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Pat.
No problem. I have another question actually, but for you guys, but I'll wait till I get to a slide there. Any other? So those are the 4 questions you had sent in, Julie. Are there any other things that either Mike or Julie, you guys had questions on right now?
Coach Haggerty, did you want to talk yours through, or do you want me to read it through?
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, sure. So Pat, Coach Haggerty had asked, can you speak to the issue of effective controlled training sessions versus how this carries over to real life scenarios or when needed during competition for athletes?
Yes. And I think I know what you're asking, right? And that would be, I'm going to flash through some slides, right? To kind of bring them slide. I'm going to flash through a bunch of them here, actually get all the way down to there, the habits, right? So we talked about the 5 breathing habits, and then in this one, PB1, we're focused on just one, which is unconscious diaphragmatic breathing, right? And this is, I think, what you're getting to, Coach, is how do we just make it right? So the conscious training that we're doing is part of that, right? It's the biggest part at first when especially if you're doing breathing training and it's something that's totally new and unfamiliar, as opposed to just, I'm an athlete in this sport and now I'm an athlete over here. And, I kind of have athletic movement down already, and now I'm just learning some new motor patterns and things like that. But if you're training something completely new to you, like in a sense, this is for a lot of people, then that conscious effort starts to make the diaphragmatic breathing, in this case, unconscious. Again, it's about getting those reps in. And something that's interesting, and then the second part to that would be when you are doing not necessarily a competition, because we don't want you like going, oh my gosh, I'm out on the mat and am I breathing with my diaphragm? Right? We don't want people to have to be thinking about that. We want it to be happening unconsciously. So when you get to in PB3, when we start talking about the breathing habits that I mentioned before about breathing during exercise, right? That is a huge part of it too. So whether I'm doing cardio or aerobic work, I'm out running, or I'm doing lifting training in my garage, right? I'm doing resistance training and stuff like that. I'm breathing in certain ways that are going to be best for not only the exercise that I'm doing, but that gets you to the unconscious level of breathing in the correct way when you're physically active, right? Because that's when you have to, when your breathing rate becomes harder or higher and higher, that's when we start to lose it if we're not training it. So if you're training it when you're doing your like exercise and things like that, then that starts to transfer to when you're doing your sport and your actual activity.
Yeah,
Pat,
that's,
go ahead, Coach.
well, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that, you know, in I sort of involved in different ways, recreational versus kind of as a coach and a former athlete in the sport of wrestling. I also enjoy golf, right? Like, but those are two absolutely different scenarios and how to. I've watched athletes that I've coached and other athletes too that literally hold their breath almost for like 6 minutes, like during a match. They would hold, they don't breathe.
Yeah.
And you can see that was one of the things from a total layperson's perspective. As a young coach, it was you could identify it. Didn't really know how to coach through it at that particular time, and not that I do now, but it was something that was recognizable. Uh, in comparison to golf, where, a more relaxed state, and so I guess my question is how to, like, learning the breath patterns and um, how they associate with a particular sport. How do you identify the differences between what would be most effective for different sports, I guess?
Yeah. And you really, it comes down to if you, and you could use this with any sport in a sense, right? In that, okay, what is the main thing I have to do, right? In wrestling, right, it's really control,
Hmm.
right? If I'm controlling my opponent, then I am winning, right? And so some what's generally called power and performance sports, right? So a lot of short bursts of energy. So that's really a lot of court sports, the field sports, and wrestling, right? You could all kind of fall into power and performance sports. But then you've got something like golf or archery or shooting, right? Things that are more action. And then some sports have a mix of both, like basketball, when you're on the free throw line, right? Where accuracy is what you want at that moment. When you want accuracy, then you need to calm things down.
Right.
Right. Now, not that in power and performance sports or endurance sports, you might not need to do that, right? Because you still have to calm yourself down at certain moments between periods, and wrestling is a great example. But for accuracy sports that depend on that, then you want to be able to calm the breathing rate, because that then allows for better focus, right? Because we know that when we are, and we talk about it in the matter of fact, let's just go right back up to, there we go. When I talked about the big five breathing habits, right? We can't help but start to be hyperventilating over just breathing a lot, like when we're doing high activity sports, endurance sports, or power and performance sports. So when that is happening, we are ramping up the sympathetic nervous side of our nervous system, the fight or flight side. It's what happens physiologically, right? So then in like golf or archery, where when focus and concentration is more important, we've got to switch that into being in a parasympathetic state and very calm. So that would be my focus of the breathing control exercises, the long exhalation type exercises, because your visual skills and things like that degrade with increasing levels of breathing rate, right? And so in golf, you want to be able to, we always say keep your eyes on the ball, but there's a lot of studies that show the difference in this. You see this in free throw as well in basketball, between elite level and good, right? The difference is, and they did this with goggles, where they have these goggles on. They have cameras that are watching their eye that can tell you exactly where their eye is looking during that accuracy component of a sport. And the elite level, their eyes move around a lot less. We all think we're looking at something very, I'm not moving, I'm looking at the ball, right? But you'd be surprised when cameras are put on the eyes, how much visual movement happens. And so for golf, as an example, keeping your eyes on that spot through the swing, I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? And looking at a spot, the elite level look at a dimple on the golf ball as an example. So you're having that calm breath and that longer exhalation-based breathing to get everything calm allows for a lot more focus and a lot more visual, what we call gaze stabilization on the point that you're looking, whether it be the free throw, right, the hoop, or from a free throw as an example, or a golf ball, or the target on an archery range and that kind of thing. Does that help?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I'm glad you referenced like the separation between sports that are probably more demanding in the sympathetic state versus golf, which is obviously parasympathetic related. And that also, I think, understanding that there's a lot of individual differences, that some are already naturally in one of those states, primarily, that's just who they are.
Yeah.
They're geared that direction and trying to find what would be the most advantageous, especially like in golf. I know it's easy to get, such a frustrating sport to begin with that it doesn't take long to introduce that sympathetic state for me and try to balance that with breathing. So
And which is interesting in golf, right? Because a very different sport from wrestling, but you can get very wound up,
yeah,
right? Because every swing is critical, right? And so it's like you got these small moments of it, incredible importance, right? Where everything needs to be as good as it can be. So yeah, it can, it can get, you can ramp up into a sympathetic state fairly easily, actually.
yeah, it can be 4 hours of just total mental collapse, especially for me right now.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is what's cool about the breathing, right? That I never thought about when I was a competitive athlete or even when I was in the military. The only thing, some things come back to me from when I was in the military, right? One of those was when we were on the range and we were shooting, right? Not fast reactive shooting, but like you're just on the range, you're shooting at 300 meters, and things like that. We talk about the breathing pattern and how, you've attained a sight picture on a target, and then you inhale, you exhale, you get your sight post on the target, and you briefly hold that exhale, and then you fire, right? So so it's things like that come back, and I realize that, in outside places, other than the breathing world, right, you can see these different things, but you've exhaled, right, which is a parasympathetic thing. Inhale sympathetic, exhales parasympathetic. You've exhaled, you're holding it briefly so that there's no more rise, right, in the gun level, and that's when you execute the shot.
Yeah,
So
totally makes sense.
yeah.
Can you talk about that pause too? That's one thing that as I continue my training, the pause, I see more and more significance in that pause part of the breath. Why is that pause and then the shot? Like what is it that makes that piece happen?
Uh, uh, Part of it is that at that moment, right? So there's always going to be some kind of movement in the body when you're breathing, right? Even if you're breathing shallow, right? There's some kind of movement. In fact, if you guys are familiar with your lymph system, we know about our lymph nodes that we have in different places, right? The lymph is the sewage system of the body. It doesn't have a pump like the vascular system has a heart, right? That pumps. The only way lymph moves is through bodily movement and breathing, right? So there's always some movement going on, but with that pause, everything is for that brief moment, not moving. And so that actual, especially real, super accuracy things like a sniper, right? And that kind of thing requires a very still moment. And so that pause, and the pauses are actually natural. As you get into PB2 and then PB3, some of the breathing control exercises are timed breathing exercises where there are either holds or pauses. And that is kind of a natural thing that happens. An inhale, very slight pause, then an exhale, very slight pause, and inhale, right? We don't try to go into that much detail in PB1. Let's just breathe and figure out our diaphragm, right? And figure out in for 2, out for 4. And the reason for that is because most people are chronic overbreathers, right? We get driven into it. We're here at the computer, and that's is modern life, right? But does that answer your question about the pause on why it's important?
Yeah, for sure. That helps. Thank you.
You said something earlier, and as a coach, I was like, oh my gosh, it would be awesome if. So I don't know if you want those kind of things.
Sure.
But you said when you want accuracy, do this. When you want performance, do this. So what came to my mind is almost like a framework or even just a cheat sheet for coaches and for athletes. Hey, when you're in a state of anxiety, use these 2 methods for this reason. Or when you want some accuracy and focus, use this one. Because I think our athletes really can identify their emotion in the moment, but not necessarily the strategy to help them. They just know what they feel, and they feel it a lot of momentum in that moment. Whereas if they can feel it and say, ooh, anger, ooh, anxiety, this is okay, here's what I need to do. As a coach, it'd be a great tool because in the moments you're trying to go through your Rolodex. But so just a thought that came inspired as a result of the conversation.
No, that's great. And I'm sure Mike's thinking the exact same thing I am right now, which is the PB, our Performance Breathing Essentials, which is the really short course. We actually made that after we made this course. In a response, in a sense, to some feedback we had gotten from some different people and organizations about having, you guys are like super users, right? You guys are coaching level, you want more in-depth information and stuff like that. But what is a very short course, very inexpensive that can, and this is one of the great things that Mike brought into the course from all his coaching experience, right? Was he asked me like, hey, what are 3 or 4 things? If you just had 3 or 4 things to teach somebody about breathing, what would you do? Right. So we brought it down to that, like it's literally 4 breathing exercises. Right. And then how could we tell them to use this within the competitive cycle of practice, pre-competition, competition, and recovery? And so that's what we did with that course. So we should, Mike, let's talk after this, because we have something like that actually. And this is, that brings up a good point of how do we, when people come into this course, how do we integrate some of those cool things that we came up, that were almost not afterthoughts, but, after that, and get it integrated into this, and get you access to that, because that is what we talk about. How
On
to
the
use
marketing
this
side, real quick, that would be a great lead generator for you guys, by the way. Like
a great
an assessment, a lead generator to get people in the door, where it's like a coach assessment. I'd have to think about it a little bit more, but basically they'd opt in via that performance breathing assessment and either a tool or a little workbook or something. But that would be just a fantastic kind of freebie that you splinter out of the bigger picture
and give so that they know. And then there's a gap for them. They're like, I don't know what these things are. I don't know how to implement them. Then it makes sense for them to get the essentials course.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And that's why we did all the also these the quick reference guides, you know, the downloads that you guys pull out of the course that you can put on your phone or you know or computer or print out. One of my big frustrations, I've taken a lot of online courses. I'm probably in 3 of them right now, right? Because I'm a learner too, right? But one of my biggest frustrations is courses that are tons of video. That's great, but I want something that I can refer back to quickly, and I don't have to go through 3 hours of video to find, right? And so that was one of the big reasons we wanted to make those downloads for you guys, so you can have that stuff. And we've got some downloads from the Essentials course that I think are what you're talking about. So Mike, let's talk about getting that stuff to him. You guys can check it out, you know, see if that helps. So the 5 big breathing concepts, I'll just go over this real quick. I'm not even sure how we're doing. Okay. Really, this is just 5 things that are really important that people don't realize, right? You don't think about the fact that oxygen is a major fuel for your brain, right? And we think of carbon dioxide as bad, but it's not, right? It is critically important for pH levels and for whether your autonomic nervous system is in sympathetic or parasympathetic response. As far as brain fuel goes, this is a big reason why when I work with post-concussion folks, we are always doing some type of breathing, you know, based on the individual, but we've got to get better fuel to the brain, because guaranteed that brain is not fueled well post-concussion, because it is a brain injury, right? TBI, concussion, same thing, right? There is there's an injury. When there's an injury, areas that are injured, in this case, neurons and brain tissue, require more fuel. Just like if you injure an area, right, you want to get blood flow there to bring nutrients there, right, and oxygen and things like that to a ACL injury or something like that. The brain is the same thing, and we tend to then go into post-concussion poor breathing patterns as well. So it becomes a big deal, as well as your brain needs fuel to, you know, for good cognition and you know, reduce things like brain fog and things like that, right? But it's also important to understand that this chronic kind of over breathing, and it's not just like you know, when somebody's literally hyperventilating, but this chronic over breathing is a response to ongoing stress levels, right? We can all feel it when we get really stressed about things, that our breathing changes. And it changes in the same way that if a saber-tooth tiger was jumping out at us, right? And the same thing. So once we recognize that and we understand that, then we can realize that bringing breathing rates down becomes very important. So then how do you do that? And that's what the course is. That's what the exercise are. And obviously it's a skill that can be trained like anything else. It's not anything I ever thought about before getting taught these things, but it is super trainable. I literally just had a massage therapist the other day who wants help with pelvic floor work. And she was at a pelvic floor specialist who was like, yeah, your breathing's all jacked up. That's really hard to change. And I'm like, no, it isn't. If you know what to do, and if you have the things to do, right? So the assessment, yeah.
Quick question on the female front, just coming from the Women's Coaching Symposium. Any science or data behind any differences in males to females when it comes to the skill set of breathing? Or are males and females pretty similar? Any special needs or considerations for either group?
Physiologically, there's not a tremendous amount of difference, right? a couple issues with females though. One would be pelvic floor dysfunction, right? You usually don't see it at the youth level, but having babies is brutal on your body, right? And because it's a topic no one likes to talk about, right? But most women aren't told what to do after childbirth and things like that to help get their pelvic floor operating correctly again. Incontinence, all these things that can happen. It's a in the CrossFit circles where they do a lot of Olympic lifts. There's I'm sure there's some weird Reddit posts and groups that and stuff like that talk about it, but those become big issues, right? And your pelvic floor, you can still consider it your little diaphragm. Men too, right? And so they should actually move together and work together. This is your diaphragm, and your torso and your pelvic floor. They should be moving together with breathing. So there are physiologically, there's obviously differences in pelvic floors between men and women to a degree. But physiologically, no difference. So the exercises, I wouldn't necessarily change it. The one problem comes with females is one, if there's any pelvic floor dysfunction, there's usually breathing dysfunction, right? And so you have to fix both of those things. And two, it depends a little bit on the age group because especially if you're in the like middle school age. Oh man, I remember going through that with all my girls. Ooh, that was a painful time, right? But when kids start getting, and this happens with females, right? When the hormones are kicking in and girls are getting chestier, they want to hide them. That it's just, and posture, in the thoracic spine starts to get very flexible, hyperkyphotic, we call it, right? And like I talk in the course, right? We talk about when we do the thoracic glides and just talk about how if you induce that, you can't breathe into your diaphragm, right? So that becomes, it's almost more, mental, emotional kind of a thing. But those kind of things lead to, or other stressors in life lead to these bad breathing patterns. And maybe it's only because I've had daughters, right? But it feels like that can happen more at the youth level with girls, right, than boys.
Yeah.
And so the
and we
breathing
talk
patterns.
about the hormonal impact for female athletes. But if you think about it, I mean, cortisol is a hormone, the stress hormone, like everything we talk about with breathing is hormone, and a lot of them like hormone regulation too. So I wonder, it would just be really neat to dig into some research around. I don't even know if there is some, but it's great insights. Just something that on the heels of this event, I'm like, ooh, there's probably something more here to dig into on the female space and how performance breathing really can shift things for them during that period of time.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not off the top of my head familiar. I'm going to do some little bit of research to see. The very sad thing about sports science is much like all medical science, most studies are done on men in their 20s.
So if you ever want to do a study, let me know on female athletes, because we can get you connected to the Tucker Center for research of women and girls in sports. And they always ask me, do you have research? We are willing to do research. And I think this would be such a fantastic
yeah. We'll talk on that for sure.
Yeah, I'm done now.
Yeah, awesome. The only thing on this slide here, the breathing assessments that I really wanted to hit on was, did the neuro assessments make sense, right? A way to test right then and there whether an exercise, in this case a breathing drill, right, or a mobility drill, was positive or negative for you, right? And does everybody understand that? The nervous system, right? Okay, good. because that is one of the greatest things I learned in my Z Health education was this. So I will use this when I'm buying new shoes. If I'm in a shoe store, right, I will do a toe touch. I'll put the new shoes on. I'll walk around a little bit. My wife hates it. She's like, "Oh my God, you're not going to do the toe touch, are you?" I'll walk around and then I'll do it toe touch again. And no matter how much I love the shoes, man, these are so cool looking or anything like that. If I get a bad reassessment, I'm not buying because my brain doesn't like it, you know. And so you can use this for just about anything. It's interesting. The breathing mechanics, obviously, diaphragm and thoracic spine was a focus in this one. The whole reason this course is laid out the way it is because over years of, first it's like, hey, I'll just teach people how to breathe in the diaphragm. Then we're like, God, they can't breathe in the diaphragm because their spine is so locked up, right? So we'll rehash this. You guys have been through the course on it, but it's important. Like there are multiple reasons why someone might not be able to breathe in their diaphragm, and it could be a joint, in this case, the thoracic spine, right? And it's because I see it a lot. This is why we kind of include these two areas of mechanics. I think I showed that last time, right? But it's just important to realize lungs are bags. They can't move on their own. The only way they take air in is we change air volume in that thoracic cavity, right? Once you start to realize that, that opens up a lot about breathing. For the control, the breathing control, this gets a little bit about Coach Haggerty, what you were talking about with calming the system down and things like that. We did the pursed lip breathing, 2 in for 4 out, right? That's kind of highlighted in the box there, in the orange. This, we see how that changes how many breaths you're taking in a minute. And by doing that, we always think more oxygen is better, but it's not, for sure. The right amount is better. And so by doing it, we change how much oxygen you're taking in, which then brings up carbon dioxide and lowers oxygen level to balanced levels, right? Which affects pH balance in the body, how your liver functions then, and all kinds of things. But that increased breathing rate, that is a survival response. That is a threat response, right? And so as you do the 2-4 breathing, and I still use this all the time, right? I might get done with doing, some kettlebell swings. I'm breathing really hard. And can I do 2 breaths of 2-4 breathing, 2 in, 4 out? And can I bring my breathing rate down immediately? That's one way I use it during exercise. And you'll see that in the later courses about some ideas on how to do that. Because if you can breathe the rate down quickly, then your heart rate will eventually follow, right? As well as so your anxiety or arousal levels will come down.
Pat, you talk a lot about the number of breaths we take each day and how that can vary. Why is bringing the number of breaths down typically more beneficial? What is that?
So really because of this right here, because of oxygen carbon dioxide balance, right? So if you habitually the numbers that I most often see, you see a lot of different things, but it's a really wide variance, right? 14 to 22,000 breaths a day. But that's a big difference, right? That is the difference between a 4-second breath and a 10-second breath, really, right? Not many people take 10-second breaths, right? And actually do that, just basically 6 breaths per minute. In a lot of breathing circles, that's kind of considered the ideal. And that is the breathing control exercise in PB3 is an ideal breath. What does a 10-second breath actually look like? But the lower that breathing cycle is, that breathing rate, generally the better, because that has a more balanced oxygen carbon dioxide ratio, and that also improves your pH balance in your body. And it will mean a more parasympathetic state, because the more breaths you're taking, the more inhales you're doing per minute, which leads to that 22,000 breaths per day, right? Inhaling is sympathetic, exhaling is parasympathetic, right? So if you have a really high breathing rate, you are in a more of a sympathetic state. Make sense?
Yeah.
Could I follow up on that and just
Yeah.
ask something that's I've been struggling with in my own mind in regards to maximum breath hold time and the value of that, like in consideration to VO2 max or any other implications of maximum breath hold value. Is there anything there that would demonstrate a lack thereof of carbon dioxide balance versus um, oxygen? Does it mean anything, I guess, is my question.
Like if your breath hold time is really low, is that?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's think of it like this. God, if I'm repeating myself from the last coach's call, let me know. But did I talk about like oxygen molecules in the body and how long everybody should be able to hold their breath?
No, not that I remember. And I
Okay,
think I was
so
with you.
yeah, so basically, if we took a Star Trek scanner, right? You know, if I was Dr. McCoy and I took a scanner and I could tell immediately, oh, you have this many oxygen molecules in your body, right? In your tissue, in your lungs, and in your blood, right? We all have as adults usually enough oxygen molecules that just if you just do the math, you should be able to hold your breath for like 7 minutes. Well, most of us can't do that, to include me, right? Right. But free divers can, right? So how is it that they can do that? Well, they train to it, right? They train to being able to be okay with air hunger, right? And having that hypercapnia. I kind of talked about I'm doing that hypercapnia training right now, where you can have high levels of carbon dioxide and your system becomes okay with that. So with the breath hold, what that's telling us is how much how much resiliency do you have right now to air hunger, right? And if we can improve that, it's generally a good sign, right? That you can your physiology, right, is more balanced, right? So it's not the worst thing in the world if you can only hold your breath for 20 seconds, right? And this I'm talking on an inhale too, right? After an inhale. But the longer we can do that, the more balanced we are, right? And so then basically that's really what it's telling us, is that we have a better balance. And the reason this does become a more physiological in the sense of both neurology and chemically, because the breathing center in our brain and our brain stem is what regulates that, right? And if we've been overbreathers for a long time and had a lot of, and our oxygen to carbon dioxide ratio is like this, the brain goes, well, this is it. This is our new normal. This is how I want to stay. I don't want to go like this. I fear going like your subconscious brain, right? Doesn't like that. It doesn't want to go what would be a healthier, in a sense, ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide. It wants to stay at what it's been used to. But through the training, then you start to change that, right? In the brain stem where the breathing center kind of lives, and you change what is the normal ratio and how your subconscious brain feels about it. It starts to feel less threatened with more carbon dioxide in your system, a more balanced between the two. And
So
so
would could I ask you then, would it benefit to practice breath hold as well as practice breath work and specific breathing patterns? Is one better than the other for that aspect of?
So yeah, so they're both, just like I love all my children equally, right? They're both actually good, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So the reason we have this course is because we want your mechanics to be good, because you just can't be a great breather if you're not breathing with your diaphragm, as an example, right? If you're not breathing well with the right muscles and you have the right mobility, right? You'll always hit you'll come up to a ceiling, right? So the how you breathe, the mechanics of it, and things like that, and your ability to control it is important. But doing that training can be good. Yeah, you can look up. I can send this out if you guys would like, but you could also look up hypercapnia or CO2 tables, right? And you'll see like free divers, there's crazy folks, but they have a training. So as a quick example, the training I'm doing right now is I'm in a very relaxed state. So I'm supine, I'm like in a recliner, right? I'm in a position because whenever you're moving, you're creating carbon dioxide, right? And this is why if you do the breath hold, you have to be very still while you're trying to do that breath hold, right? No one can hold their breath as long if they're walking around as if you're being very still. That's why it's easier even in a pool when you're just kind of floating underneath the water, right? And you're in the shallow end, it's actually easier. But the basic training for type of, there's some different versions, but it's basically you do a breath hold, on inhale, take a big inhale, and then you see how long you can hold your breath. Let's say it's 2 minutes, right? And then your training is 2.5 minutes of regular breathing. At 2.5 minutes, you hold your breath for 1 minute. So 50% of your max breath hold. After you've held your breath for 1 minute, then you breathe normal for 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And then you do your 1 minute breath hold again, right? Then it's down to 2 minutes. So it's 15-second increments in your normal breathing. And after each one, so what you're doing is you're going from 230, 215 to 2 to 145 to 130, et cetera, down to 45 seconds. And then after each of those breathings, right, you are doing your 1 minute. I'm using that as an example. You're half of your max hold, right? So as you breathe less, you still have to do that half of your max hold as you go down that breathing table, right? So it becomes harder because you haven't gotten as much oxygen in, because when you're breathing for 45 seconds as you did for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So that is a method of training that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can put some stuff together, Mike. We can send that out if you guys are interested in that. We don't go into that into the course, but interesting enough, doing hypercapnia training drives neuroplasticity too.
So they do complement each other just in different ways.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much. Yep.
So would you say, Pat, it's fair to say that if, for example, I have a team of athletes and I ask them just to hold their breath on an inhale and they can't last more than 20 seconds, that we probably have some leading indicators or even just representation of just the physiological state of our athletes, even maybe the mental state of our athletes, maybe some anxiety and stuff going on. Would you say that that would be a fair just assumption?
Yes.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Very much.
Because I mean, I did that with my athletes. We were just doing box holding, and some of them couldn't hold for 4 seconds at the top.
Yeah.
They were like in panic mode, and I'm like, so, and we have a very high stress, chronically anxious athletes that we work with. So,
yeah.
I was thinking exactly down the same line as Julie. Like that to me is, I see that, like, athletes that are in that 20-second range, it's like they can't go past that. And even, that box breathing to us might be natural, but to them, it's already a stressor on their nervous system. Like that freaks them out just doing that.
Right, right. And this in the box meeting, are you guys already into PB2 or is this stuff you've done before?
That I've just done it before.
Yeah,
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 I've used a couple different techniques. So,
yeah,
box breathing being the one most kids know about it now, Pat. They do it
yeah.
also in schools and especially at the collegiate level. They've heard of it, right? So it's something familiar to them. So I use that one often.
Yeah. And what I often find that, so in PB2, we talk about two different time breathing, box breathing and triangle breathing. So triangle, you'd inhale for 3, hold for 3, exhale for 3, inhale for 3, hold for 3, exhale for 3. So it's a little bit easier, right? You could also switch that around. You could do the hold after the exhale instead of, on the triangle one. It's a little bit easier, but the key indicator is, okay, you can do that for a couple breaths. Cool. Can you do that for 2 or 3 minutes? That's the question. Oh, and then if you guys are having athletes that can't even do a 4-second hold to do the first box breathing, right? Super big indicator that one, they're not good breathers, and so they're leaving something on the table in their sport, right? And 2, they're going to benefit massively from becoming better breathers. The 14-day breathing habit builder. Just want to see if you guys had any questions. We just wanted to build something that people could easily go, because you can find a ton of awesome breathing stuff on YouTube and things like that. You find some bad stuff too, but what you don't often see, okay, what do I do? Okay, you've taught me these things. What do I do? So this is, this is our answer to that, right? 14 days, you're going to focus on it. It's only going to be a few minutes, and you're doing this for the reps / time that we show there, right? And you're just working through it because we want to build this as a habit, right? And we want to build these methods as a habit. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, so probably not a huge need to go massively more into this unless you guys have questions on it. Another awesome quote from Dr. Cobb: "The body you have is the body you have earned through your movement." So the gal playing pro volleyball there is a client of mine, Claire. Awesome. We kept her playing into her 30s in pro leagues. She was playing for the best and oldest volleyball club in France at that time. Pro volleyball is a much bigger deal in Europe than it is here. Or you could be like the guy at the computer there, right? So what you have done, we've all earned it, right? And that's not to put anybody down. That's just a realization, right? And I've realized that myself with different things. And breathing is the same way. So the breathing patterns we have are the ones we have earned over time. But it doesn't mean we can't change it, right? It doesn't mean we can't improve it. I'm going to blow past there. Of course, if you do have any more questions, I just want to give you a little bit of heads up what's coming up in Performance Breathing 2. For the mechanics, we start getting to side rib inhales, which means the muscle we're doing is a serratus anterior, connects from your scapula or underneath your shoulder blade, right? And comes across to all the ribs. So it packs our shoulder blades down. If you were doing a plank, right, and your protracted shoulders planking on the ground, your serratus anterior is contracting the scapula or the shoulder blade forward. But if your shoulder blade stays still, right, if your scapula stays still and you're using your breathing into, right, you're actually pulling the ribs out and up. So we teach you how to do that, right? Some side rib inhales, basically. And then we get into some more thoracic mobility drills. We talked about the breathing control a second ago. We go into triangle breathing and box breathing drills. And then into the 2 breathing habits we're focused on are now we just did unconscious diaphragmatic breathing is what we're trying to do, right? The next 2 we want to focus on are unconscious nasal breathing and less breaths per minute. So we talk about how to do that. Obviously, just training these things is always a way to build habits, but other ways, especially unconscious nasal breathing, hugely important. And in the modules or in the next one, we'll talk about just how important nasal breathing is. It's very important.
I'm excited to get to the nasal breathing. I have our girls do that once in a while. And again, it's just another indicator that, I mean, they go into panic mode. They're like, I can't do it, coach. I mean, 30 seconds in and they're like, I'm dying. So I'm really excited to learn more about just the context around that and the tool.
Yeah. One, it is super important for all the reasons that we'll talk about in the course when you go through it. Two, there's some ways to train your ability to do that better that give you some incremental ways to do it, whether you're doing pure endurance training, walking, or anything else, running and stuff like that. Some ways to think about how to start to get better at being a nasal breather all the time. And we can't do it while we're talking, which is interesting, right? So then, so then you need, you have to focus on it. If you have your job where you talk a lot like I do, you've got to be focusing on it at other times. But yeah, super important. Awesome, guys. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you. Very much appreciated.